That was a lot of content and a lot of talking. So let's take a look at some examples so this will start making more sense. First, let's look at the completed contract project. Remember that in a completed contract, we're capitalizing both the costs and the revenue on the balance sheet while the project's in flight. And then when we're 100% complete, we recognize both the costs and the revenues on the P&L via the elimination step in the estimate process. So let's talk about the setup. So we're going to need to do some setup on the project group and the ledger posting setup, of course, we've seen that. However, we also need to talk about the period code and the cost template. So let's hop over to AX and take a look at this. First, let's take a look at the project group. I happen to have set one up already, but let's look at completed contract. So again, we click fixed price. When we do that, we get a little bit more things that we need to fill out. The first thing is let's journalize our cost to the balance sheet. So you could pick P&L if you wanted to, and it would journalize to the P&L. However, when you ran the estimate, it would then do entries to move it from the P&L to the balance sheet, because in a completed contract, you want to match the revenues to the costs, so you want to hold those all onto the balance sheet until you're done. So after that, then we get down into the estimate section. We can choose the completed contract accounting rule, and once we do that, then we can choose the matching principle. Now in this one we've selected the sales value matching principle, and when that happens, then we need to set up a category for that sales value matching principle. If we selected production and profit, we would need to assign categories for production and for profit, and these categories would drive the final accounting to the GL, as other categories do. Let's take a quick look though at this category. Again, you can see it's pretty standard category. It's a fee type category. The only difference is that we have this estimate flag checked off. That lets the system know this is only for estimates, can't be used to create a fee journal or any other fee transaction other than that which comes out of the estimate process. So the next setting that we need to consider is the cost template. So let's take a look at the cost template. You can actually select the two that we have in this system. We'll change this to auto amount. Let's take a look at this cost template. The cost template defines how the percentage of completion for a fixed price is calculated. And it's relevant to completed contract as well as percentage of completion, because the system needs to know when is the contract at 100%. So on both, I mean, for percentage of completion, you need to know it in order to recognize revenue periodically. For completed contract, you need to know percentage of completion when you're at 100%, so you may recognize revenue. So looking at the template, the first tab, the important stuff here is that it tells you what the completion method, so you could pick automatic or manual. And then that allows you then, once you do the calculation, whether I can override it automatic or I can override the automatic calculation and enter my own. The other more important thing is what the completion is based on. So right now I can either base it on amounts or units. So right now we have it set on amounts, so it's going to take the actual cost amounts and compare it against something else in amounts, either a budget or another cost amount that I've entered to do the calculation. So where does the numerator and the denominator go? Additionally, you see these mandatory cost lines, and we've defined them. These are specific to your implementation, and you can give them whatever name you want, but you have to have 3 for the 3 transaction types of costs. What this does is it makes sure that all costs are included and all categories are included by default. This will be a little more clear once I click into this a little bit farther, but then once I've set this up, I can go into the cost lines, and here I can then do a little bit more refinement of what I want, how I want the calculation to do. I can say for these cost lines, I want percentage of completion to be calculated on these, but say I don't want item costs to be included in my calculation, I can turn them off here. If I go into the general tab, then for this cost line, for the hour category, I can also set how the completion method is set. So right now I can use total budget to actual. I can also use the work process progress percentage coming from the WBS element, or I can use a total cost to actual where I use a different form to set my total costs. We'll leave this as budget. The last thing, so this is how this all ties together, is that you have these mandatory cost lines for each transaction type. Each mandatory line then needs to include all categories. That makes sure that all costs are included in the calculation for default. Now I can add extra cost lines, and then I can use this to exclude certain categories. Let's say I don't want sick leave or sales or training to be included in my cost to complete because they're internal costs. I could use this facility to exclude them. So let's close out of this. The last setting we need to be concerned with is the period code. And like I said, the period code is just how often does this process get run. So if we go and look at this period code, you can see it's like any other period type. This one is set, the frequency is set up to be the ledger period. And if I look at the periods that have been defined, you can see it's a monthly, and it gives you, it tells the system the start date and the end date to capture those transactions to do its calculation. So that covers the project group along with some of the related things, the cost template, the period code, matching principle. One other thing we need to be concerned about is the ledger posting setup. And here we need to define the costs, the expense accounts for the costs, the WIP accounts for cost. We also need to define the accrual accounts. And since we're using the sales value method, we need to define the sales value accrual account, the WIP sales value accounts. If we were using the production and profit method, we would have to define the accrued revenue production and the WIP production, and the accrued revenue profit and WIP profit. So now we've looked at the setup. Let's talk about a transaction processing example. So when I go through the process with a fixed price project, there's a few different things that I need to do versus a time and materials project. Of course, I need to create the project, but I also, since I'm using the forecast to actual method of calculating my percentage of completion, I need to establish a forecast. Then I can process my actuals, and then every month then I run the estimate process to see where I'm at. And then when I also need to establish my on-account transaction to establish my contract value. And then when on this completed contract, when I'm 100% complete, then I need to eliminate the project. So let's hop back into the system. All right, so let's go to our list of projects. Create a new project. We'll create a fixed price project. We'll use our completed contract project group, create a new contract, so we have a nice clean contract with our friends at Alpine Ski House. All right, so the first thing we need to look at is we talked about the estimate project. So down here in the revenue recognition fast tab is where that estimate project is assigned to this project. And when I created a fixed price project, behind the scenes, the system will create the backing estimate project. And you notice it's a one-to-one mapping with the same name. If I wished, I could put it into edit mode, and then there's a few other estimate projects out there that I could select if I wanted to do, say, a sub-project, header project, where I have the revenue recognition happen at the header, and then the costs are collected at the sub-projects and rolled up to the header to calculate the percent complete. But let's leave this in the one-to-one mapping. You can also see that the cost template and the period code for this estimate project are here, as well as whether it's been eliminated. So if I wanted to change the cost template or the period code for this estimate project, I can go to the estimate project itself, and then I can change it here. This is where we set up, remember on the project group, we set these up. Those were defaults that default into whenever I create the estimate project of that group for this project. These default in, but I can change them if I wish. But let's leave them. Let's get out. And remember that this is a fixed price project. We need to establish a contract value. The way we do that is through the on account transaction. So we'll create a new one on the 1st of the month. We're going to do $50,000 worth of work. So now when I close this, I've registered the transaction, but that means that the revenue recognition system will take this into account when doing its calculation. However, I won't be able to eliminate it until I invoice it. I do need to set my project stage to in process to be able to do that. Let's go and invoice this. All right, so I've established my contract value and I've invoiced it, but remember, since we're doing a fixed price project, it has no bearing on revenue. So if I ran the project statement, you can see there's no revenue. If I look at WIP, you can see that that's where my $50,000 is being held. So the other thing is, remember the cost template that we're using is a budget to actual, so we need to establish what is that budget look like. So when I do my calculation, this would be the denominator. So let's say it's going to take, we're going to do a very simple one, it's going to take 100 hours of application development to deliver this project. All right, so we have established the contract value, we've established a forecast to measure our results against. Let's go and say in the first month of our project, let's post some actuals. We'll use our journal just in the sake of time. So we will post Wendy Richardson has done some application development. So she has done 50 hours. Post it. All right, so this is nothing new so far. Now we get into the actual estimate system and running the estimate. If you remember our flowchart, the first step is to create it. And what we do here is the system will calculate the percentage of completion based on the cost template or whatever you've said. So here, you can do this as well online like this or in batch mode. So right now, we've selected what date we're going to use. That date has been driven off the period code, which defaulted off of the estimate project. What the cost to complete method is going to be, we define that in this cost template, so we're telling it use the cost template. However, I can overwrite it here, and I could say use the WBS progress percentage if I wished, but let's leave it as cost template. And here I could also say only use automatic, do not allow anybody to use manual or just do a manual calculation, but let's use what's been defined in the cost template. We also need, since we're using forecast to actual, we need to use the tell what forecast, so that tells the system what denominator to use, and the actuals are the numerator of the percentage of completion calculation. Let's accept the window. All right, so you can see we've done created our estimate, and the system has calculated that we're 50% done. If we look here, we can see here's our contract value. This is the revenue that we will recognize. And then you can see, though, that we've accumulated none, even though we're 50% done, and we've recognized none in this estimate. That's because we're using completed contract, we're not done. If we went to this tab, you can see that the total is, we're going to recognize $50,000 of revenue. Our costs, based on our forecast, is $19,000. We'll have a margin of $31K. We've done actual of 9,500, we still have cost to complete 9,500, so we're halfway done. So the next step is we post this. So now that's posted. In this case, there is no actual posting to the ledger. If I had set my journalizing to P&L, you would see from the P&L, when I posted that cost transaction, it would have gone to the P&L, but because of its fixed price completed contract, it needs to be on the balance sheet. So when I posted this estimate, it would have moved those costs. But since I set my journalizing to be balanced, it doesn't need to do that because they're already in the right place. All right, so let's pretend that now we've gone another month, and let's post some more activity to this project. So let's say on the 13th, Wendy did some more application development. She did another 50 hours. Let's post it. Now let's run our estimate system again. Let's say it's the end of June. Click on estimate, create a new one. System knows you've done May, so now June is the next one. We'll leave the cost templates as driving our calculation. Remember, we need to set our forecast. Okay, now we're at 100% done. So if you look again though at the general tab, you'll see that we've got no revenue recognized, but we are at 100% done. So now let's post the estimate. Again, if we look, we haven't recognized anything yet. You go and look at postings, nothing happened. If I was posting my cost of the P&L, it would have moved them to the balance sheet from the P&L. But maybe if you're more observant, you've noticed that this elimination button has come up. So now, this is how, once we're 100% done, this will only illuminate the elimination button when you're 100% done, 100% invoiced, and your last estimate is posted. So let's click the eliminate button. So from here, I can automatically have the project set the stage to finished. We'll do that. Run the elimination. Now you can see that I've actually got accrued revenue. So it tells me that I've actually recognized revenue. So now if I look back here, this now shows me that I've got $50,000 worth of revenue and I've got $19,000 worth of costs on the P&L, and my gross margin was 31K. Let's also go look at the actual posting, and here you can see now that I've taken my $50,000 and I've recognized revenue, accrued revenue, out of my WIP. I've taken my WIP cost out and I put it onto the P&L as well in my WIP cost accounts.